The grandeur of the Randolph estate was undeniable, a fortress of old money nestled in the rolling hills of Connecticut. With its white stone columns, perfectly manicured gardens, and an air of silent arrogance that permeated the property, it was a testament to a legacy that was struggling to stay relevant. Inside, beneath crystal chandeliers and the watchful eyes of long-gone ancestors, the wedding of the year was about to begin. Jacqueline Morris stood before a massive mirror in the bridal suite. The exquisite ivory satin gown, with its intricate beading that shimmered under the soft light, felt less like a dream and more like a carefully constructed cage. Her reflection showed a composed woman, her dark skin radiant against the pale fabric, her hair styled to perfection. But beneath that curated exterior, a sense of unease had been building for months. This marriage was not built on love. Her fiancé, Thomas Randolph, was everything society deemed desirable, tall, refined, and from a lineage that boasted generations of wealth. But that wealth was a facade, a thin mask over a crumbling fortune. Jacqueline's family, on the other hand, was the embodiment of modern success. The Morris name was synonymous with innovation, technology, and cutting-edge investments. Her parents, self-made billionaires, had built their empire from nothing. For them, this marriage was a strategic alliance, a merger of old wealth and new power. Jacqueline had agreed, pragmatic as always. Love fades, her father, Edward, had often said, but a solid partnership lasts. At first, she had been intrigued by Thomas' effortless charm. But as the months passed, the cracks in his mask had become undeniable. The subtle, cutting remarks about those different from him. The way he dismissed her work as a mere hobby despite her being one of the youngest and most successful strategists in her field. He seemed to believe that by marrying her, he was doing her a favor. Standing in that room, the reality of her decision stared back at her, and she wondered if she had made a mistake. The ceremony was a blur. Vows exchanged, rings slipped onto her fingers, a brief, rehearsed kiss that was devoid of any passion. Mrs. Jacqueline Randolph, the officiant announced, and just like that, it was done. The reception was held in the estate's sprawling gardens. Under a canopy of twinkling lights, champagne flowed freely, and laughter echoed through the air. Jacqueline played her part flawlessly, a practiced smile on her face. Thomas, however, thrived. He was in his element, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with the elite, making no effort to include her. She found herself standing alone near a fountain when she overheard a hushed conversation between two of Thomas' business associates. Smart move on his part, one of them said. Tying himself to the Morris empire. That girl's got the kind of money that could keep the Randolph name relevant for another century. He played it well, the other man chuckled. She thinks she's getting a husband, but Hez getting an investment. Jacqueline felt a cold certainty settle over her. She had always known, in a way, that this was a business deal, but hearing it spoken so casually, so dismissively, made her blood run cold. She was not a partner, she was an asset. The thought made her stomach turn. As the evening wore on, the facade began to crumble. Thomas' polite veneer strained when he interacted with her family. His handshake with her father was clipped, his exchange with her younger brother, Malcolm, tense. Malcolm had never liked Thomas, his quiet skepticism bordering on disdain. You're an interesting man, Randolph, Malcolm had said. Not the type I pictured my sister with. And what type did you picture? Thomas had replied, his smile tight. Someone who knows what he's getting into, Malcolm had said, a subtle warning beneath his words. Jacqueline saw the anger flicker in Thomas' eyes, the slight clenching of his jaw. He was losing control. His polished charm was just a thin shell over a simmering, volatile temper. The cake cutting was a grand spectacle. A towering masterpiece of white and gold was wheeled onto the stage, gleaming under the soft light. The guests gathered, cameras flashing, for the symbolic first act as husband and wife. Thomas stood beside her, a practiced smile on his lips, but Jacqueline saw the fury brewing beneath the surface. He was still fuming from a recent conversation with her father, who had made it clear that the Morris family would not be a blank check for the Randolphs' struggling finances. They cut the first piece together, a clean, precise motion. Jacqueline took a small piece and lifted it to his lips. He accepted it, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly as he chewed. Then, it was his turn. She saw it coming before it happened, the much larger piece he took, the way his grip on the cake tightened. In that brief moment, she saw his anger, his bruised ego, his need to reclaim power in the only way he could. With a swift, deliberate motion, he lifted the cake and shoved it directly into her face. The room fell silent. Time seemed to freeze. Thick, sugary frosting smeared across her cheek, her lips, her eyelashes, dripping down onto the delicate lace of her gown. Thomas had expected laughter, a harmless reaction, a playful shrug. But Jacqueline wasn't laughing. She simply stood there, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of his humiliation settle into the air. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, a hushed, nervous sound. Her father stood, his face a mask of barely restrained fury. Her mother, ever the strategist, put a hand on his arm, a silent command to wait. Jacqueline reached for a napkin. She wiped the frosting from her face with a slow, deliberate motion, her hand steady. She met Thomas' gaze, and for the first time that night, she saw something new in his eyes, doubt. Uncertainty. A flicker of realization that maybe, just maybe, he had made the wrong move. She let the silence stretch just a moment longer, ensuring that everyone in the room felt it. Then, with quiet, devastating clarity, she turned on her heel and walked away. The reception did not recover. Jacqueline retreated to the bridal suite, the soiled fabric of her gown feeling like a heavy shroud. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She had once believed she could navigate this marriage on her own terms, that she could outmaneuver him, but she had been wrong. A knock sounded at the door. Her mother, Camille, entered, followed by her father and Malcolm. "You don't have to make any decisions tonight," Camille said, her voice careful. "This is over," Jacqueline stated, her voice calm and firm. For the first time all evening, she felt something close to relief. She had been waiting for a reason, a final, undeniable confirmation. And now, she had it. "Good," her father said, his voice like steel. "Because if you weren't walking away from this, I would have dragged you out myself." The door opened before Thomas even had a chance to knock. He stepped inside the suite, the smell of vanilla and orchids a stark contrast to the scent of whiskey and cigars that clung to him. "I came to talk," he said, forcing a smile onto his face. Jacqueline stood in the center of the room, her gown still stained, her expression unreadable. She gave him nothing. No anger, no tears, no reaction he could twist. "Are you really going to do this?" he asked, his voice low and laced with frustration. "Walk away from this marriage over a joke?" It was just a bit of cake. No one laughed, she said, her voice steady and cold. It was the first time she had spoken to him directly since she had walked away from the cake table, and her words landed like a blade. His jaw tightened. "So that's it? You're going to humiliate me in front of everyone, make a spectacle out of this?" Jacqueline took a step closer. The pity in her eyes was almost palpable. "This was never going to work," she said softly. The certainty in her voice made something inside him tighten, a feeling he wasn't used to. He had expected to be in control. He had never expected to lose. He let out a sharp exhale, his mask slipping for a brief moment before he forced himself to smirk. "What now? You think you can just walk away? The world doesn't work like that, Jacqueline. People don't just get to rewrite the rules when they don't like them." She smiled then, but it wasn't the kind of smile he had ever seen from her before. It was a smile of quiet, unwavering power. "I already have." And with that, it was over. Thomas stood there for a moment longer, a man who had lost everything in a single night. Then he turned on his heel and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, the silence swallowing the space he had occupied. "We'll take care of everything," Camille said, her voice smooth and assured. "I want it done by morning," Jacqueline said simply. "Of course." Jacqueline turned to her father. "Make the calls." "It's already being handled," Edward said, a quiet satisfaction in his voice. She knew what that meant. Her father had not been waiting for her to make a decision, he had put things in motion the moment she walked away from the cake table. By the time Thomas even realized what was happening, it would be too late. She moved toward the wardrobe, pulling open the doors. Inside hung the outfits she had brought for a honeymoon that would never happen. Without hesitation, she pulled the ruined gown from her body, letting it fall to the floor in a heap of silk and lace. She reached for something else, something simple, comfortable, an outfit that belonged to her. She dressed quickly, each movement precise, methodical. When she was finished, she turned back to her family. "I want to be gone before he realizes," she said. "We have an hour," her father said, checking his watch. "Maybe less." That was enough. She had no desire to witness the aftermath, to watch as Thomas realized that the world he had so carefully constructed for himself had collapsed overnight. The news would already be circulating, his business connections pulling away, his name now attached to the image of a man who had lost everything. He would try to fight, to rage, to regain control, but it wouldn't matter. She moved toward the door, her mother and brother following. She didn't look back. She had nothing left to see. As they stepped into the elevator, Camille finally spoke. "Where do you want to go?" Jacqueline considered the question for only a moment. "Anywhere but here." Her mother nodded. "Then that's where we'll go." As the elevator doors closed, Jacqueline felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Freedom.